And you're live.
We are live, guys. Welcome. I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Guys, welcome to Tightline Live, brought to you by Bass Pro Shops. Now, guys, there's a lot of stuff going on in the fishing industry right now. The Bassmaster Classic is just getting ready to take off, and obviously fishing around the country is taking off. It is that spring fever, no matter where you're at. Even if you're up north, you're starting to get a little bit of pockets of water. Everywhere else in the country is icing off, and it's that time of year where you don't know which direction to go. Are you bass fishing? Are you walleye fishing? There's a lot of opportunities, and I know that I am just like all of you, trying to take advantage of as much as possible. So again, welcome to the show. Guys, this show is all about delivering cutting-edge information, tips, tactics, things that are hopefully going to make you a better angler. So again, I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Got Devin Menino right here behind the cameras, answering some questions and kind of running the whole program for us. Guys, and again, no matter where you're watching, you could be watching from the Bass Pro page, you could be watching from Bass Pro regionally down here in Denver, or you could be watching from the Tightline Outdoors page. So wherever you're watching from, we really appreciate you being here. We got an exciting show for you. And again, just welcome. So talking about tips, tactics, things that are going on. We've been covering bass for the last couple weeks, talking to some tremendous bass anglers, talking about everybody getting ready for the Classic. We're going to shift gears tonight just because all that's taking place. We're going to talk about walleyes. We've been getting so many questions from people all excited, just saying, hey man, we got walleye fever. The rivers are opening up. You have the MWC, one of the first bigger, pro-style tournaments this coming weekend in Illinois. But again, the walleye situation is taking off. We're in pre-spawn, spawning situations, and the fishing is good. So we've had a lot of people talk to us about early season walleyes, cold water. How do you cover water when these fish go in that in-between state between pre-spawn and spawn, where they're still taking a meal, but they're migrating towards their spawning site. They're in deeper water, they're in cold water. How do you catch these fish? So we actually went on the water like we've been promising you we would, guys, and we shot a video, which we're going to show here in just a second. You probably saw the little preview clip for it, probably airing this week. But guys, we got the full clip for you here in just a couple seconds. But the whole concept of this video, guys, was trolling lead core line in basin water. So fishing deeper water with the use of lead core. So trolling lead core line. Who out there uses lead core? Pop up here, guys. This is all about you. It's interactive. Sign up on the questions right here. Go down to your questions. Put a comment down there and just say, hey, I use lead core. I don't use lead core. Because again, it's a tool that I think, most anglers, if you're a troller, you're a walleye angler, lead core is one of those things that you almost have to have on your boat. And there's a lot of different variations of why we use lead core, a lot of situations, I should say, that we use lead core in. And there's no right answer. You can use it for everything. In this situation, this clip we're about to show you, we're using lead core to take baits to a deeper level. So we're taking little size 5 flicker shads, a bait that normally dives, 12 feet in the water column. With a traditional monofilament line. You add lead core, and you can get as deep as you want to go. As long as you have enough lead, you get this bait to go down to 100 feet. Most time we're fishing in that 20 to 30, maybe 40 feet of water in a general situation. And that's about what we're using that lead core for, is to get us down just a little deeper than this bait would normally go with just traditional line. So that was the concept of this video. These fish are actually sitting in a mud basin. So they're sitting in mud, and they're feeding on small little bloodworms. And they're just down here nosing and feeding on all this dirt. And your goal is to get that crank and drop it right down to that level that these fish are feeding on, like you're going to see in this video. And it's going to be an awesome segment to understand why lead core is the true great method to catch these fish about that bait control. But while we're talking lead core here, we also got to say the other thing about lead core that a lot of people overlook. Everybody sees this lead core line, again, generally speaking, probably a nylon line with lead inside. Everybody sees this and they immediately just think depth. Everybody thinks salmon fishing or walleye fishing, and it's all about depth, which that is probably one of the primary uses for it. The other big factor of lead core is it is very determined by your boat, by your boat's turns, your boat's speeds. Everything your boat does, lead core line does. So there's a lot of times where if I'm on a river situation, or I'm fishing a shoreline or a lake or reservoir, and I have a lot of contour, the whole shoreline is rough. It's ins and outs, and I'm trying to follow a contour 7 feet of water, 10 feet of water. You can use lead core because lead core will follow those turns that your boat makes. So if you are going down a shore and you cut in to the right and then you cut back out to the left, lead core almost snakes along in those same fashions. It'll cut the corners a little bit, but it really does a good job of staying with those corners, as to where a monofilament cuts every corner and doesn't truly achieve the contours that you're hoping for. So again, the nice thing about lead core is it's shorter, it's closer to the boat because you don't have as much line out to get the depth that you need, and it really helps walk you into those areas that you couldn't normally achieve with other line. The thing we always talk about, if you took 100 feet of lead core, put it out behind your boat, 100 feet of monofilament, and you trolled and you made a big figure 8 with your boat, if you went up in a drone and took a picture, the lead core would be in that figure 8 right in the middle of your boat. The monofilament would be in a balled up mess because it couldn't do it. So again, the concept of lead core, it follows everything your boat does, so it allows you to have better bait control. And we all know, better bait control catches you more fish at the end of the day. So that's the concepts there. The last thing we really love lead core for is it's so easy to manipulate up and down in the water column. So let's say I'm trolling along like we're going to do in this video, and we're trolling along in deeper water, 22 feet of water. And all of a sudden we hit a rise, we hit a sunken island, we hit a hump, we hit a point, whatever. We hit something in the water column that gets us shallower in depth. If I'm trolling superline, or I'm trolling monofilament, or I'm trolling even mono with an inline weight, as I hit that shallow water, I have to go back to my rods and I have to crank up that rod to get that bait to come up. And then when I want to let it back out to get deeper, I go out there and manually let line out. With lead core, I can bump up my speed just a little bit, and that lead core will rise in the water column. I can slow down my throttle and back down my speed just a little bit, and that lead core dramatically sinks. So now all of a sudden, if I have 4 rods out or 6 rods out and I'm out guiding, now instead of running around crazy trying to pull up line and drop down line, I can bump up speed up and down to pull those lines up and down if I have to as I hit structure. Then you'll see things like this video where I'm working on minute changes, inch changes. I'll just do that manually, pull out a little bit of line and reel in a little bit of line to adjust. But guys, the moral of the story, springtime, small cranks, cold water, slow conditions, or slow speeds I should say, lead core line is one of those tools that at the end of the day is going to catch you more and bigger fish every time you're on the water. So again, if you don't have lead core, it's absolutely a must. Using lead core is going to achieve so many different things that you need to do out of a bait. So again, your presentations are going to be endless when you start using lead core. So that's a big factor. If you use lead core a lot, we hope that everybody's using it in the right fashion. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about leader lengths, leader materials, all of that kind of stuff here just coming up. So guys, again, we're instead of just talking about here in the studio, we're going to throw to a clip that we shot on the water just yesterday to have this real-time information, guys. So we went on the water yesterday, Devin and I trolled some lead core to build up some tips, tactics, and education. Guys, we're going to be here, so we're going to play this video from this week right now, but we're still sitting here in studio. So right when this video wraps up, bring your questions. So go down to the comment section, bring all your friends in this conversation, share this video, but bring them in here, and we'll answer your questions right afterwards to hopefully, again, break that learning curve and hopefully make everybody a better angler. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this clip. We'll see you here in just a second. All right, guys, welcome. We are on the water to deliver you this footage that you want to learn about deep cranking and finesse fishing walleyes in a pre-spawn spawning condition. So we're here reservoir fishing. A spawn site for these walleyes is up on this rock face right here. That's where majority of the fish are going to spawn in this lake. We're 600-700 yards off of that on a big mud flat. The overall depth of this whole flat is bouncing between about 18 and 25 feet of water. And again, it's just a solid mud flat. These fish are out here actually nosing down, almost like a perch would, feeding in that mud. There's a heavy forage base of gizzard shad, but right now the gizzard shad are fairly large, 4, 5, 6 inches long, and in this mud is just tons and tons of small worms, different blood worms and worms of various kinds, and it's super high in protein, and it gives the fish exactly what they need in this pre-spawn spawning condition. So the goal today is take a real small crank, like a flicker shad number 5 right there, and we're gonna literally run this bait inches off bottom. That's the big key here, is to run that bait inches off bottom. Now that bait normally is only going to dive that 12, 13 feet, but what we're going to do is actually use lead core lines. We're going to use 18-pound lead core, drop this bait right down there. It's going to take a lot of maintenance on my behalf. I'm going to keep the boat at exactly 1 speed. We're going to start off at 1.4 miles an hour. We're going to put it in the rod holder here, and I'm constantly going to be letting out line and pulling in line. I'm going to nick bottom and just barely back it up to where that bait is literally inches off bottom. That's one of the biggest keys to success, is keeping that bait flawlessly in that that zone. The second you get up high, 6, 7, 8 inches off, all of a sudden you're above those fish because they're nosing down, looking down, and literally picking up all these worms and all this food out of that mud. So speed and bait depth in that strike zone is absolutely key. So I'm gonna take a shorter rod here. So I got 18-pound lead core. I'm gonna run it right here kind of off the back. I'm gonna start off with about 120 feet of line out. That should get me right down in that depth where I wanna be. Then I'm gonna have a second rod out here. It's actually a longer rod. This is gonna be a 10-foot rod. I'm gonna be running out the side. I'm gonna run both my rods right here on this side of the boat so I can stand in one position to constantly let out line, pull in line, and be ready. Now, all the fish are gathered here, so you might be able to catch, a 12 to 15 inch male, and you can catch a 12 to 15 pound female. So everything's gathered up here, so we're gonna work through those fish, find the right color, and hopefully be catching some serious fish. The only big thing that you really have to keep in mind here, other than that zone, is the use of lead core line. You don't have stretch. So we're very conscious of when we do hook into a big fish, really take it easy. Fight with the rod, have a drag, maybe a little lighter than normal, just for the fact that we have no stretch in this setup here to where a big fish takes a big run with these small cranks. Oftentimes you could lose that fish. So we'll be cautious of that. And you can see on the graph here, there is a lot of fish sitting right on bottom. We're gonna drop that bait right to that spot. It'll put right in their face, and hopefully we're catching here in no time. Oh, fish right there. Literally just inches off bottom. I mean, this whole game is about inches. Literally take out 2 inches of line, drops that bait down a ½ inch, and you're in that strike zone. It's crazy because it's simple, but yet so important to have that flawless depth gain. Like a decent fish. Now I tell you, no stretch on that lead core, little short rod. Gotta just take your time. A lot can go wrong. He's gonna cross over on us. Try to keep their head down. You can see that fish out there, a ton of fish on the graph. Right there, young male. Nice start. And again, the biggest thing with this bite is knowing your fish. We know that we're on pre-spawn fish like that. That's a young male. But yet, the big thing here is that fish and a female this big are all together. Now, there's certain times of the year where we look for that separation. We know the males and the immature females will be on structure and the big females will be suspended. This time of year, they're all together. So where literally you can go from that fish right to the other. Now, one thing I want to talk about here real quick is what that fish hit. So many times during these feeds, you guys are questioning, it's you that are dictating the questions and how we do these feeds, but everybody asks us color. What comes in play with color? Number one, we're fishing some deeper water. We're down there in the mud. We're kicking up mud. So I do lean to a brighter bait just for the fact that there's a lot going on down there, a lot of dirt, a lot of moss. So I go with a brighter bait for that. Number two, the water's extremely cold, which usually leans me towards a brighter bait. But number one thing I do, even when I'm looking for brights or metallics or shines or whatever I'm looking for, I always try to have a bait with multiple colors. That's the biggest tip. When people ask me about color selection, I go with a lot of colors. So right now we have chartreuse, blue, red, and white. So I'm offering them a lot down there. Now, if I keep catching fish on this bait, let's say I catch another one, the rod over here, the next bait I put on that one might be solid red, might be solid chartreuse, solid white, or solid blue. I'm gonna go through all the colors on this bait because I'll bet you anything, they're hitting this bait because of one color. They're not hitting it because they like the rainbow effect of all of them. They like one color on it. But I always start with multiple colored baits. Hopefully you'll find one of the colors they like, and then you break it down from there until you find the true pattern of exactly what they're looking for. And that's how you catch more and bigger fish. But they hit that one. Let's see if they'll hit it again. All right. Yeah, again, you just can't talk about enough how you literally pull out inches of line and boom, instant hookup. Feel that fish throwing that head around. It's awesome with lead core. You feel everything those fish do. They're liking the shorty rods today. It's crazy having a 5-foot rod and a 10-foot rod so you stay real clean. You never know which one they're going to hit, and some days they like the short one, some days they want the long one. And there might be nothing different about it. It might just be luck, and some days it puts off just a little bit different action. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about is the actual action of the bait that comes into this. And this is one of the other big questions when it comes to lead core. Everybody asks, number one, how long the leader is. That's a huge question. Hey, Nate, how long is your leader? But more importantly than even length is what's your material made out of that your leader is. Is it monofilament? Is it fluorocarbon? Is it superline? And all of that dictates how that bait actually moves in the water. Fish is staying nice and deep. There. That one hammered that old purple flicker. They're eating it. Flat out eating it. So talking about that, again, we always ask ourselves, what is the bait exactly doing in the water? And you know, today we're actually trolling 10-foot mono leaders. That is like your starting point of all leaders. As I start off with 10-pound mono, and I go from there. There we go. Tell you, that little fish choked it. So, you know, why we talk about this? So we're acting about, again, what the bait's doing in the water. So we're starting off today with 10-pound mono, and that's gonna do a lot to how this bait swims in the water. So basically your lead core comes down, achieves your depth, and then from there your mono actually flattens it out a little bit. The nice thing about mono with that no stretch of the the lead core, this actually adds a little cushion to it. So you're gonna get a little bit of stretch out of the mono, which is nice because all of a sudden when the fish takes a big hard head shake, you got a little bit of give right there to pulling out the hook. So our starting point, again, 10-pound mono is kind of like your bread and butter to start. But again, if you want more action out of the crank, so you want more action, more wobble, we use super line, using like a fire line per se. If you want a stiffer action, let's say you want that bait staying super straight, we'd use a fluorocarbon so we have more of a stiff line. So there's a lot of variables, but again, mono, fluorocarbon, or super line, they all add different action to this bait. We also use the super lines in the situation of fishing around trees or a lot of wood. But more so than the snag thing, we're usually thinking about the action of what that bait is doing in the water. And we want to make sure that we're doing that correctly. So colder water, we use mono. You know, when the water warms up, we want more action. A lot of times we're using that super line. So things to think about. Also, we're using a crosslock snap right there. It's a Berkeley product. It comes down to a narrow V. Again, kind of slowing down that action. If you want a lot of action, we're going to use things like a dual lock, a big wide snap. You want to cut the action down dramatically, tie your line directly to that split ring right there. But again, every time you add a snap or a split ring, you add a joint. More joints, more action. But between the leader and your snap, there's a lot of small variables, and those small details help you catch more fish at the end of the day. I'm gonna get this back in, get another one. All right, starting to get a pattern. This is our polka dot one. I'm gonna roll. He's cutting over. There we go. Oh, love the no stretch. You know, and speed's crucial. And again, the biggest thing with speed is adjusting for it. So, number one, you have to play with the speed to figure out what they want. So I'm constantly playing with boat speed, bouncing between 1.2 and say 1.8 miles an hour, which is critical. I mean, those are all very big changes. A lot of people will see that and just say, oh, that's pretty close, but really you need to be at 1.2, 1.3, or 1.4. But every time you adjust, these baits are going to dramatically come up or down in the water column. So the second you go from 1.7 to 1.5, these baits are going to probably dive 10 inches deeper. So a lot goes into that speed, so you really gotta be cautious. That fish is coming up on the surface right there. But again, speed is a huge portion of that. The other big thing that we kind of talk about here, flip him in, is our rods are always low. So you see right here, that rod tip's there, this rod tip's here. Everything we're doing is precise. Everything has a madness, if you would say, to it. Nice fish right there. Another male. She's looking for that female. But as I put this bait back in, I put it back in our Fulby rod holder, you can see everything is level. We're using line counter reels. Everything's calibrated. Now this lead core is actually segmented. So every 30 feet it changes color. So if you don't have a line counter, you can still get pretty close if you don't have you know, what we call the fancy equipment. So again, it's gonna get you close, but having a line counter, you're absolutely flawless. All our rod tips are at the same height. Everything we're doing is a machine to where once you catch one fish, put the rod back in, adjust to that depth, boom, 2 fish, 3 fish. It makes it easier having a pattern, especially when it's precision using this lead core, because again, everything matters. The minor details, the leader length, the snaps, the overall rod length, the amount of lead, everything comes into play, but you master it, I'll tell you what, catching deep fish and having precision and control while trolling catches you a lot more fish. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and bring your questions. I mean, right now, this is all about the live interaction. I'm here in studio, so you watch this, now ask your questions and let's talk about it. Alrighty, guys, what'd you think of that? Did you enjoy it? We're going to start doing a lot of that. Our whole goal here, guys, is to be on the water, bring you footage, go live from the water. If we can't go live from the water, go on the water, get you tips, get you everything that we hope is going to help you, the angler, and then talk about it here live in studio to answer all of your questions. And, guys, we're blowing up with questions here, so we're actually going to jump right to that. One of the biggest questions we got here on this feed, I got my computer right here in front of me, is leader length of material. And there's a lot that goes on to that, and I think half of it is a true situational thing, and half of it really is confidence by the angler. So with that being said, you have monofilament, you have fire line, or super line, I should say, and then your fluorocarbons. Those are, generally speaking, your three, basic leader materials that guys are using. For me personally, I would say 9 times out of 10, I'm running with a mono leader. The main thing for it is that lead core has no stretch. I run 18-pound micro lead, and with that being said, if you get a 10-pound fish on there, we're running small cranks. So many times these fish are following the crank, especially in this situation where the crank's running just this far off bottom. The fish actually come from above it and push it down. Half the time we land these fish, they have mud in their mouth or rocks from where they push that crank and pin it to the ground. So when they're hitting it like that, so many times you get these fish that are just barely hooked. You have a 10-pound fish with one hook of the treble in the back lip, and you have no stretch. You're just playing with danger. So I love running mono simply for the fact that I get a little bit of stretch. It helps me land a lot more fish. The other big thing I like about mono is it really completes that nice taper. So that lead core comes down real stiff. That mono almost flattens out and just makes for a really nice pull. And I know it sounds funny, but those lead it just pulls really nice behind that. So it's nice for that factor. So the low stretch or the lots of stretch to land fish, and then just a general taper it gives me, I love it. I would say generally speaking, my go-to length is 2 pulls. So I have a 6-foot wingspan. So generally speaking, my starting leader is 2 pulls, so it's about 12 foot. I tie basically a double uni between my lead core and my line, and then I tie a knot obviously onto my crank. So I probably lose a foot of line and knot. So I'm generally speaking 10 to 11 foot is my starting point. You would go longer for a couple reasons. Number one, you would go longer in the situation of just gin clear water and you're worried about those fish seeing the lead core. I very rarely ever see that. Even in the clearest waters, I personally have never had those issues, but it's something to think about. So if you're worried about the fish seeing that, you're going to go a little bit longer. The other big thing is you're going to change the overall pull of that crank the longer you go. So generally speaking, that lead comes down at a severe angle. Then that mono really flattens it out and slows it down. So that's your pull. The further you go back, the more you start getting into a more of a traditional pull. Again, if you're a person that understands downriggers and that type pull, it's a general thing. But generally speaking, it's just you're going to get a pretty dramatic angle change when you hit that leader material. So the longer you go back, basically just a more traditional pull you get out of that crankbait. Generally speaking, though, a 10 to 12 foot leader is probably my 100% starting point on that mono. Then you talk about other leader materials. You talk about super lines, whether you're running Fireline or any of the braids or fusions. The general concept behind that is 2 things. Number 1, to deliver more action. Number 2, I should say 3 things. So number 1, you get more action out of your bait. You get no stretch. So anytime you use a super line, you're getting a ton of action delivered straight to that crank. Nothing's getting absorbed in that mono leader. There's no stretch. There's no sponge. So you get more action out of a super line. So that's one thing. 2, that super line, just generally speaking, a super line dives 30% deeper than a traditional monofilament. So as that lead core comes down, we're talking about that angle, and you're using a super line material, it really continues that a little straighter. So you don't get as much of a mellow curve. You get a more severe curve out of that. So again, you're going to get overall deeper diving depths. You're going to get a lot more action. And again, you're just getting just a different pull on that crank. The third thing we use Superline for, and this is probably one of the bigger things that you see a lot of guys using it for, where I'm fishing in a lot of these western waters, I don't use it, but anytime you're fishing around super snaggy areas, you go up to a Wahi in South Dakota, you go fish the trees in McConaughey, you fish anywhere where there's a lot of snags, whether that's rock or timber, and you're pulling above flooded trees, which is a very common lead core technique. Let's say you're pulling the bottom and there's old sagebrush or whatever. If you're in a snaggy area, you can switch to a 20-pound super line, and with this lead core, nothing breaks. So as you literally hit trees and hit snags, you can just buckle down on that rod and rip your crank right out, bend your hooks, and save a lot of your crankbait. So the super line thing is also really good for the fact of saving a lot of bait. So generally speaking, I am one of the two. I'm almost always about getting more action on my bait or saving baits when using a super line. And there's certain days where delivering more action can catch you more fish. So again, it's a very situational. And then fluorocarbon's the last thing that would use. I don't use a lot of fluorocarbon when I'm using lead core, but the main reason is you're going to get a more severe diving curve, almost like the super line. So instead of the mono really mellowing out, that fluorocarbon is going to be stiffer. It's going to sink more, so you're going to get more of a straight pull off that lead. It's also much stiffer. So a lot of times if I'm dealing with situations like I'm getting snagged, if I'm really turning sharp, I can switch to a fluorocarbon, have a stiffer line, and sometimes I can turn a little bit sharper with that fluorocarbon. A lot of times that can help me out in real tight maneuvering. So those are kind of your three options. I hope that answered your questions. The other thing we're saying here is, how do I tie my knot? If I'm using traditional lead core, so I'm using regular lead core, the stuff your grandpa used, I'll actually kind of fray the nylon on the outside, grab a hold of that lead core, actually slide the sheath down, pinch off that lead, and I'll take my mono or my leader material and I'll thread it inside that sheathing, tie one overhand knot, pull all the rest of the leader material through, and it's on. It'll never break. One overhand knot saves it tight. But when using a micro lead, like I've been using a lot, if I'm running micro lead, so a much thinner diameter, and I can't quite thread my leader material inside that, so I do the same thing. I kind of pull the sheathing away, get the lead. I actually strip out about 6 to 8 inches of lead out of that sheathing, and then I just use that to tie a normal double uni. So I just tie a uni on the leader material, leader on the lead, slide them together, and I have a great uni, and they never break. The only thing I don't do is I never put barrel swivels on there. A lot of guys are tying barrel swivels on there. It's just rough on your guides. Even if you're using the tiniest barrel swivel out there, you're still really beaten up, especially that rod tip guide. And eventually you're going to get just a little scratch or a little nick. Your line's going to start really hitting that, and it can cause for a lot of frays and a lot of lost fish way down the road. So I avoid the barrel swivels, tie line leader, and that'll hopefully help you a lot more fish at the end of the day. So that's that question. Next one, we got one from Bo Campbell talking about Ron Seelhoff. Being a Colorado native, guys, Mr. Ron Seelhoff lived here in Colorado on the Eastern Plains, and literally until, he might even still hold it. If not, probably one of our buddies, Robert Blosser or Keith, or one of the next bite guys might have pushed him out. I'm not exactly sure on that, but a couple years ago, he was still the all-time money winner in walleye history, especially the PWT. Ron has passed away now. He's passed away probably 4 or 5 years ago. But Ron was literally one of the best trollers in all-time history. He was also one of the very first to pull lead core. And I'll tell you the craziest thing about Ron, from what I knew him, I would be at situations, whether I'm in Colorado and we're allowed to use 2 rods per angler, or you're in another state where you're fishing a border water, you can have 3 rods per angler. There's times where we have a bunch of people on our boat. We'll have out 6 rods or 8 rods, and we're just doing everything we can to cover water and present baits. And Ron would come by. He'd be all alone in his boat and he'd have 1 rod. He could be using 3 and he would have 1, and he would have flawless control with that lead core. That man could literally break down the water column in half-inch increments. He'd be like, yeah, the fish are sitting 3/4 of an inch off bottom. We did really well today. And he was a master at it. He understand the strike zone, and he felt that he couldn't manage it with multiple rods. So he'd run 1 rod, and catch as many fish as everybody. Catch as many fish as the guys using 6, 8, 10 rods. So no, it's cool. We appreciate you commenting that, Bo, because again, Ron Seelhoff was definitely the master at it. We have another couple questions about speed. As far as speed goes, guy, the biggest thing with lead core is it follows your speed. You speed up, your lead core rises. You slow down, your lead core sinks. So the biggest thing for me, I'm all about developing a pattern. Even though a lot of times I'll catch fish right as I speed up or right as I slow down and my bait moves, a lot of times it turns into a reaction strike. But the biggest thing is when you're developing a pattern for the first time, you want to know where the fish are sitting. You want to know what they're into. I want the most consistent speed as possible when I start fishing lead core, just to find that zone. So I want to start at 1.3, just say that's the speed I'm going. And I'll hold that for a while. If I don't catch fish, I'll bump up to a 1.5. And I'll hold that a while. Very rarely am I constantly going up and down, because you're going to catch fish doing that. But very rarely do you ever know exactly where they're sitting. You don't know if they were at a certain depth, because you don't know if your bait was rising or falling. So I hold a very consistent speed. With that said, colder water, colder speeds. Warmer water, warmer speeds. In this video, we're catching our fish at 1.5 miles an hour. We kind of had a false water temperature. Water temperature was pretty warm that day. It was in the low 40s. I think it was 40, bounced between 42 and 44. So that 1.5 was perfect for us. That water's 40 degrees or 39. We might be going a mile an hour. That water is 74 degrees. We might be going 3 miles an hour. But again, generally speaking, again, don't take it for just serious fact, but colder water, colder speeds. Warmer water, warmer speeds. That's going to be a huge play there. I'm going to take one more question, then we're going to see if Devin's got anything else here before we wrap it up. We have a couple questions about colors. This is going to be very specific to your area. We have waters right where I'm fishing here, where I guide, where some of these lakes, it's all natural, all times of year. No matter what the water temperature is, they want natural base. We have other bodies of water that follow a very traditional walleye pattern. When I say that, generally speaking, colder water, using brighter colored baits. You fish Erie, you fish a lot of the Midwest. When that water's really cold, we're using bright colored baits, whites, pinks, oranges. As the water warms up, you get much more natural. That water's at its peak temperatures in summer. You're using silvers and, metallic blacks and blues, really bait fish colors. That's kind of a traditional pattern. We have another question about night fishing. I kind of have a weird take on this. I love night fishing. It's one of my favorite passions. I can't say I love fishing, late at night. I just love the opportunity that it brings of big fish and lots of those fish. When you talk about colors at night, walleyes can see tremendous. They can see amazing at night. So you're not so much worried about, they can't see it, let's not worry about it. You definitely have to worry about it. But generally speaking, if I have a half moon or fuller, so I'm dealing with a lot of moonlight, I use a lot of shiny baits. So again, a lot of metallics. I like my baits to have a prism so the fish can see it, because again, they'll see those reflections, they'll see those shines, and they'll come running in. When I have less moon, so I'm less than half, I tend to go with a flat bait, and I want to cast more of a profile. So instead of relying on shine and shimmer, I rely on the general profile. I just want a blank image that the fish can tell that is something, and they swim up to check it out. Again, it's a huge deal there to kind of understand the difference of those. I can tell you right now, let's just say you have a common bait. Let's say you have a rogue or a husky jerk or, a cutter. I literally I'll have multiple boxes of baits. And let's say I have a gold bait, gold black or gold back, white bottom. I'll have brand new out of the package baits that are shiny, and I'll use those on those nights with big shiny moons. Then I'll have other baits, that same bait that I've caught 200 walleyes on, and they've chewed it up so much that I don't have much of that shiny effect on them anymore. They're matted out, they're dull, just from the fish feeding on them so much. And those are the baits I use on the lower moonlight. And it's crazy how it makes a difference. Literally having a bait, same color out of the package, but one's chewed up and matted out, and it works better in low light periods. I have one that's more shiny, more shimmering, works better on those shinier nights and those brighter nights. So that's the biggest thing for me, is I want shinies when there's a lot of light, I want dulls when there's not. The other last thing I say when I pick baits for night fishing, talking non-manufacturers, I want a bait that has the roughest side. So I want a bait that has a rougher profile. A lot of people talk about, why is a Smithwick rattling rogue so good in certain situations? To be honest with you, more so than the action. I don't think it's the action that necessarily catches fish. I think it's the fact that like a Smithwick rattling rogue has one of the roughest sides. If you feel it, actually textured. It has one of the roughest sides, and every one of those sides indentions almost like a golf ball. As light hits that bait, all those little indentions and little pockets cast light in different directions, creating the fish opportunity to see that bait, and therefore they strike that bait. So anytime I'm night fishing, even if I take a bait that doesn't have a rough image and I scar it up, I'm not going to sand it to where it turns into a matte finish like we just talked about, but I might take a knife and just kind of put some edges on it, just to where I get casting of different angles. And I promise you, things like that can catch you more fish. So I love a rougher sided bait, or a rougher rougher edged bait to cast more profiles, and therefore catches you a lot of fish. So
giving away all the secrets tonight.
All the secrets, absolutely. It's all coming out there.
Hey, can we explain to Cody Lawhorn when and when not to use planer boards with lead core?
Absolutely. With that being said, you have a lot of options, and I think it's almost one of those things that people used to say is voodoo. You talk to your parents, you talk to old-time walleye fishermen. Nobody put lead core on planer boards, so they thought, no need. You're fishing deep. We're not worried about scaring fish. But there's a lot of different options, just like we talked about. Number one, covering more water. So I won't put a planer board on until I have a pattern. So I'm going to troll long line off the boat until I develop a pattern, until I know, hey, I'm going to troll at 1.5 miles an hour, and I know that the fish are sitting, XYZ deep, and I know I have this much line out to catch those fish. Once I have a pattern built, that's when I'll start throwing on the planer boards, because I know I'm dialed in. I know my speed's not going to change. I know I'm letting out 100 feet of line on the lead core or on the rod, and I know I'm in that pattern. Then I'll add boards to cover more water, and that's going to help me catch more fish at the end of the day. So that's kind of the general concept there. The other thing is same thing when we're pulling edges. So if I'm pulling a shoreline that constantly has those ups and downs, and I know the fact that lead core follows those curves, follows my my boat control better. Same thing. I'll find that pattern of where my depth's at, where my speed's at. I'll throw the planer board on, and I'll do it in that fashion. But generally speaking, we're not using boards until we develop a pattern. Once we develop a pattern, then we start throwing on the boards. That'll just save you a lot of headache at the end of the day. So hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, and I think when you're fishing those fish that are stuck to the bottom, obviously you're constantly adjusting, so boards aren't very effective.
Absolutely.
If you're in deeper water and you're catching suspended fish, you can get that dialed in, like you said.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, and when you're fishing like we are, where these fish are literally, if you actually drop a camera down and you watch these fish on the mud, and this happens everywhere. I've done this in Minnesota on Mille Lacs. It had a huge mayfish, or a mayfly hatch. Same thing as we've done it in Big Bay to Knock, where the fish have a big mayfly hatch, and you literally watch these fish nose down, and when they know that those midges are there, almost similar to a bloodworm, and they know that that food's in the mud, they'll puff it. They literally flare their gills and like spit down and create a puffing, and those little worms will come out, and those little larvae will come out, and they hammer them. And it happens everywhere across the country. And when it's that tight bite, you literally have to be inches off bottom. Sometimes it's a half inch. So we're constantly, pulling out 6 inches of line and nicking bottom, and you go up just like a quarter of a crank. It's tiny details, but you get in that strike zone, and you definitely know when you're dialed in and you're catching a lot of fish. So hopefully that helps you out, guys. Whereas we're going to run here just a little bit, but we're going to be on the water, guys, literally every week now, doing a lot of this type stuff. So if you like this show, comment below. Tell us what you liked. Also, what species do you want us to talk about? We've got a ton of walleye going on. We got a ton of bass going on. What species do you want to learn about? You comment. You tell us what you want to learn more about, and we'll go out and shoot a show to demonstrate this type techniques to hopefully make you a better angler, guys. Again, this entire show, everything that Bass Pro's doing, they care about you, the consumer. So you guys are watching. Tell us what you want to learn about. Tell us what species, guys, and I'll promise you, we will bring that into play, and we'll bring the show to you. You got another question, Devin?
We do. Let's wrap it up here with we talk about calibrating line counters.
Yep.
When you're using lead core, do you put a backing on there, and how do you get all your rods the same?
Absolutely. So I do. I still run a backing on mine. I do everything I can to keep mine the exact same. Now I will say that micro lead is fine-tuned much more. It's got a smaller sheathing, and your lead comes extruded just a little bit smaller, and therefore it's a little more accurate. With traditional lead, when they're pouring lead and they're basically putting that sheathing, there's a lot of little ups and downs, and you'll actually get little heavier portions of lead through one section and lighter. So it's not quite as precise as mono, but it's very close. So I basically put 100 yards of lead on each of my rods. So depending on what reel manufacturer you have, I run a lot of Abu Garcia 6500. So I can run a micro lead. It ends up being, if I had to, I'd put like 130 yards on there. So I basically put on my 100 yards of lead directly onto my spool. Fill my spool to where that takes me with that 100 yards. I then tie on mono as my backing. You can use any backing you want. I use mono. I tie my backing on there and actually fill my spool to where it's perfectly full. That way I know I have full spools. At that point in time, I peel everything off and I reverse it. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? But again, I want my spools perfect. So I put my 100 yards of lead core on perfect. I just go by color, so I know what 100 yards is. All lead's going to come 10-yard increments, 30-foot colors. So I put on 100 yards of lead. I then fill my spool with mono to where it's perfectly full. Then I reverse it, put the mono on first, my lead core's on top, and all my rods are flawless. And that helps me keep everything dialed in precisely. And I still use a line counter. You can use colors, but the problem is when you get down to those inches like we were in this video, it's nice to catch 3 or 4 fish at 107 foot and then just spread 107 across all the boards and you're catching fish. So again, more so than relying on colors, we love the line counters. Gets us just a little bit closer and helps us catch a little bit more fish at the end of the day. Guys, Again, I'm Nate Zelinsky. I hope you enjoyed this show. We're going to go through here, and we'll bring in a lot more of these comments. We'll answer them here just a little bit later. And again, guys, comment. Bring your friends in this conversation. If you like this show, make sure you give us a like. You can always go to the Tightline Outdoors page. We go live from there a lot. Again, Tightline Outdoors. Give us a like there. Devin, also throw up that keyword. What do we text if we want to get notifications when we go live?
I don't think I have it, but it's 33444, right?
33222.
There you go.
Perfect, guys. So again, you're texting the word Tightline to 33222. We'll see if we can throw that up here in a little bit. But again, if you want notifications of when we go live, you're always texting the keyword Tightline to 33222. Guys, and we'll send you a text notification when we go live. Again, always go to the Tightline Outdoors page. Give us a like, guys. And again, everything you saw tonight is brought to you by your Bass Pro. Guys, again, you want to talk about the greatest retailer in the world, guys. Make sure you stop by your local Bass Pro and Cabela stores. I promise they will get you set up with all the gear that you need to have a successful day on the water. Guys, there's a lot going on. We're going to try to do our best to bring you all the hot bites. I know the Bassmaster Classic is the talk of the town, but guys, there's walleye tournaments going on, and I promise you there's a hot bite near you. So again, guys, I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Again, always go to the Tightline Outdoors live show and go to Tightline Outdoors, like that page. And again, huge thanks to Bass Pro Shops, both nationally as well as regionally here at Bass Pro Denver. Guys, a huge thanks to Devin Menino for running the show. And lastly, guys, again, I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. We'll see you next week. Make sure you comment. Tell us what you want to see.